We welcome back for the third of 5 consecutive appearances here on the agenda, Mike Harris, the 22nd Premier of the province of Ontario. From 1995 to 2002, he had the top job in politics in this province. Welcome back, Mr. Harris.
Thank you.
Let's go back to the 1990 and the 1995 election campaigns. You were in third place going into both of those election campaigns. You did, to a great extent, set the agenda in that 90 campaign by saying something that most politicians, I think, had not said to that point, which was, we're going to cut taxes.
Right.
In 95, you ran on it again. What leadership traits did you think you had to demonstrate in those 2 campaigns to be taken seriously as a political leader?
Well, in 90, we had no platform. We didn't have time to develop a platform.
You had the job for a month or 2.
I'd had the job for a month. We had no money. We had no platform. We hadn't, and to have a platform that that the whole team buys into. There's no point, you know, doing the polling, putting a team together. Here's the platform. Go out and campaign. If the whole team isn't part of it, they haven't been part of development. This is a great lesson that you learn. So the one, you know, we said, well, what can we agree on at this point in time? And it was taxes, that we were overtaxed, and that it was getting worse and worse and worse, and that governments just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, there were things that fell out of that that squeezed the private sector, but it came from that one principle. So we were consistent in that, but of course we weren't near experienced enough. And did not have a credible platform and team of candidates supporting a platform that we could form the government. So from 90 to 95, that's what we developed. We developed the money, we developed the platform, we did a lot of listening for many years. We started putting out blueprints and little documents. We would say, here's what we've heard. We would, you know, initially we didn't hear it from enough people, so we would say, here's what we've heard. And when I say enough people, because we'd have these meetings and 5 people would show up from St. Catharines or something. And then we would get pushback, and then we would test it. We had these policy advisory committees. And by the way, Frank Cleese was you know, very instrumental and helpful in helping us develop that whole program. Tony Clement, others, we had, and the party. And there, they weren't just PC people. We would have, you know, the head of it being a progressive conservative, if you like, but then we'd invite teachers on education. We'd invite all the experts who not necessarily were Tories, and we got them there by saying, well, why don't you help us influence, you know, our party platform? If you don't want to vote for us at the time, that's fine. That was the difference between 90 and 95. We were ready. We had listened a lot. The platform reflected my values. They reflected what we had heard. They went to the sort of small c conservative core. It was the right recipe at the time because we were in such a disastrous position in 1995. All those stars lined up, and we ran a pretty good campaign to boot.
There was a difference, though, between 90 and 95. You're right, in 90 you were barely on the scene and nobody had any predictions for you, nobody had any expectations of you. By 95, my recollection is that there was a significant chunk of the press gallery at Queen's Park, probably the elites of this city, and others in the province, who not only criticized you, but vilified and ridiculed you. You were dismissed as a dumb golf pro, which most politicians don't have to deal with. How do you demonstrate leadership and try to do all of what you did when, you know, you're picking up the paper every day and it's not just criticism, it's kind of personal and it goes beyond that? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think they tried to marginalize me, and of course the critics would. You know, the Liberals and the NDP. I mean, it's an old strategy. You know, always try and marginalize your opponents. So they played into that as well. But the advantage of that is you get underestimated as well a lot. I mean, Jean Chrétien proved that. The little guy from Shawinigan, they always underestimated him. He turned out to be a very decisive and smart leader. By the way, when you're looking at examples of leadership, in my view, whether you agreed with them or not. So that you put your head down. I got a lot of golf pro votes and a lot of golfers votes, by the way, at the same time. But the truth of the matter is, it was not only that, it was sort of Northern Ontario. How could a kid from North Bay possibly understand Toronto? It was, I was never part of the academic, you know, establishment, so how can somebody that doesn't, you know, have a master's degree or a PhD and possibly understand people?
Or a lawyer. Most pretty
yeah,
much
or a
lawyers.
lawyer. A lot of them were lawyers. So they were all of those things, if you like. But I understood people, and I understood and felt very comfortable that what we were promoting was the right thing. And you get into, I don't want to be accused of particularly on your show, of cliches or anything, but you know, it really comes down to I had a compass, and the team around me had a compass, and it was kind of dependency versus independent. It was freedom versus this
there was a
dependency, and that transcended all the policies. And what we discovered was most Ontarians shared that view and that belief.
But there was a moment, I seem to recall this, where you were away from the legislature during that period between 90 and 95. You were away for a good chunk, I can't remember how much time. And everybody was joking about, oh, he's probably up north working on his handicap.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think you were off adopting a child.
Yeah.
And you didn't want that record corrected. Nobody, now that's an interesting decision. You know, I mean, you would think that you'd want people not to joke, and here's why I'm away, here's what I'm doing, but you didn't. Why not?
No, and because that was private time, and that because to use that as a defense, then you bring your bring your child and your family into it. But let me say that you know, when they said you're off working on your handicap, it wasn't just, you know, at that time. I did have a conscious strategy not to be into the legislature, where the Queen's Park Gallery, let's face it, they're and I don't mind saying it, I've said they're a lazy lot, right? Question period is where they can get their story. They can go there, watch it for an hour, do a scrum, and it's all done. They don't have to go find the leader. They don't have to go to North Bay. They don't have to go out and see what's happening. So question period is a convenient way, and it became that. And what I felt through a large part of this time was that there was no mileage for me at question period. We had many good critics who could add. There was mileage for me being you know, in Beamsville. There was mileage for me being in Fort Erie. There was mileage for me here, particularly early on. And so we had a strategy that said, now we'll go to where we have a receptive media, we have a receptive audience, we start building. And that gets back to what we talked about you know, earlier in the week, that you go where you're accepted, you start to build credibility. You know, there's a little, some would say you throw a little pebble into a pond and it ripples out. That's coming from the center out. We came from the outside in to the center, if the center is indeed Toronto and Queen's Park and the Gallery. And that's how we did it.
Tell me how things change. When you're no longer an opposition politician, you're now the premier of the province. It's all on your shoulders. Do you have to consciously change the style by which you lead now that you've got the job?
I don't think so, but perhaps I did. Everybody evolves, and perhaps I did, but if I did, I didn't do it consciously. I still.
But the job is so different. You're not just.
The job is different. You're a premier of all the people.
Yeah.
You're not just developing strategies for attacking, you know, the government, or selling. You're in a campaign selling, you know, your policy. Now you are governing for all the people, and we took on lots of things that were not in the common sense revolution. Problems would come along that you had to deal with. And so I had this attitude, and I tell you, I know some of my opponents will not think so. I always said, once the election was over, once we're going forward, we're going to try and win every vote. Everybody's a potential PC voter. Everybody's a potential Harris voter, if you like. Never, obviously not successful in that, but I think if you have that top of the mind, that's a better way to govern than not. And yet, you know, I've been accused of, by some of you know, of being divisive. I don't see it that way. What I do see is I wouldn't back down. When I was challenged by the unions, I didn't give in. And that maybe created some divisiveness, but I make no apology for that.
I wouldn't have put it that way. The way I saw it was you were not prepared to, put it this way, you danced with the ones that put you there. which meant that the 45% of the people who elected you in 95 as premier and then re-elected you by the same total vote
Little
in
higher.
99.
Little higher.
Maybe a fraction higher. You cared about them the most. And if the other 55 weren't on side, tough luck for them. Now, that was how it looked to a lot of us at the time. You don't think that's accurate?
No, I govern with a philosophy, and it really does go back to this philosophy of entitlement, of status quo, of dependence, really. So whether it was welfare, I mean, I never gave up on anybody in welfare. So, you know, the pessimist, if you like, would look at it and say, well, you've got to give them more money, right? And I looked at it and said, no, we got to teach them how they're going to get a job and not need welfare. And so a lot of the policies were that way. And let's face it, if you believe in freedom and if you believe in competition, you believe in getting the best bang for the buck, you are going to come into conflict with the public sector unions. That was my main fight. It was not the private sector unions, even though they spent some money against me. It was the public sector unions. They liked the monopoly. They wanted to keep it. I understood that. That was their job.
You had no hope of winning them over, though. You didn't ever think you could do that, I presume.
I would never win the unions over. I won a lot of the membership over.
You got a lot of votes among the members.
No question.
How did you? We've talked about how you run a caucus, how you run a cabinet, how you run a premier's office. What about how you run a civil service? Because you are the guy who, you know, basically appoints all the deputy ministers. Okay. You're the guy who's sending out the signal that here's how we're going to run the government, and I need your help to implement. How do you get them to follow?
Well, by and large, I got to say this. I think the Ontario, particularly at the senior levels, and there's sort of 4 levels of senior level management, and I think they're very professional. I think they're very good. I think they
nonpartisan?
Are nonpartisan, and there will be the odd exception, of course. And there were some who had difficulty with the Common Sense Revolution agenda, and they either moved on voluntarily or eventually, you know, didn't end up being part of the team, which is fair. Both leaving and fair, maybe me asking some to leave. And why would you want to work if you fundamentally disagreed with that, you know, the direction we were going in? But I thought, for the most part, and certainly they were very professional. So the Common Sense Revolution, when we interviewed for the top job, one of the first questions I asked was, you know, have you read the Common Sense Revolution? And they would all say yes. I said, you know, did you read it 6 months ago, or you know, did you read it about 10 days out when the poll said I might win? We'd have a little laugh over that, and some said, yeah, it was kind of in the last week. I really been boning up, you know, Mr. Harris. One individual came in with the Common Sense Revolution and said, I've read this, and I understand it, and we can implement it. And her team of people, by and large, they were her recommendations. This is Rita Burak. She was a wonderful Secretary of Cabinet. We worked closely together. We met every morning on the agenda. And I'm going to tell you this, there were times when I would say to her in a morning meeting, Rita, this isn't happening over in such and such a ministry, you know, and we all agreed we're going to do it and everything else. And she'd come back to me the next morning. She said, I've checked into this, Mr. Premier, and your minister is holding this up. It is not the bureaucracy. So we worked as a team. We worked very well together. We incented, by the way, all the top levels of management. We offered all the unions, you know, incentive pay and everything. They turned it down because it was against their principle. But we incented senior management. We respected them. We you know, with the Trillium Awards and whatnot. And I had great cooperation.
Just finish that story. What happened to the minister who wasn't playing ball even though the civil service was prepared to?
Well, there was a phone call, and the next day he played ball.
You want to say who it was and what the situation was?
No, I don't want to get into individual, but it happened more than once. You know, that's because, you know, the minister would always say, "Oh yeah, we're going to get there." But anyway, that was.
I know we're out of time. Can I have 2 more minutes? I really want to ask one more question. Can I do it? Okay, good. We did a program last month on the 15th anniversary of your election win, which was June 8th, 95. And Leslie Noble, who ran your 2 successful campaigns, and Christina Blizzard from the Toronto Sun both pointed this out, and I thought it was fascinating because I didn't pick up on it at the time. The first 4 years you were premier were pretty bloody eventful. There were a few demonstrations you may remember, and you got reelected in 99, And Leslie Noble said the Mike Harris who won that re-election was not the same guy who won in 95 because, you know, he was tired. He had been through the wars, and he just didn't have as much wind in his sails for his second term as he did in his first. Is she right?
I think she's partially right. By the way, in the second election, Leslie Noble was also, somebody had dragged out an old quote from about 6 years before that said Mike Harris's goal was to get elected, implement an agenda, get reelected, and then leave. It was the overall game plan, by the way. It was never to be a career politician or stay there forever. So that's partially it. Secondly, I would say she's wrong in the first year. The goal was to implement the common sense revolution. That was the one that we had really worked on. The second agenda, blueprint we called it for Ontario, was not as clearly defined, I don't believe. We got into surplus. It wasn't as critical that things, you know, some of the changes that we had to make, a lot of them were time sensitive. I think the caucus had been worn down too. I think Leslie is right in that. It does wear on you day after day after day. And the personal attacks, and you know, David Tabucci's wife had eggs pelted at her, you know, and there was a certain sense that, okay, we're reelected, when do we get to enjoy this, you know, because there was a tension in a lot of the changes that we made. And I also went through changes in my personal life. You know, I was separated. You know, with my marriage, I had things to work on there, both with, you know, my ex-spouse and who are very good friends today, and my children and whatnot. So I think it was a combination of all of those things, and it was time for new leadership.
That seems like a good spot to leave it today. Thanks much, Mr. Harris, and we'll do it again tomorrow.